review them is the journalist and author Janelle Aldred and the journalist and broadcaster Thomas Copeland. Thank you both, Janelle and Thomas, for being with us, and happy Easter to both of you if you celebrate it and hope you had plenty of chocolate eggs, as I did. Let's start off with the front page of the Daily Mail. Thomas, so the Archbishop of Canterbury says that government policy is ungodly. I mean, it's quite a thing to say, but exactly the sort of place where Archbishop should perhaps be delving into, would you say?
Well, in his sermon on Easter Sunday, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, certainly didn't hold back about his views on the government's latest proposal of a Rwandan immigration policy. Speaking in Canterbury Cathedral Easter Sunday, he said it was the opposite of the nature of God. He had serious ethical questions. He said it was the UK subcontracting out its responsibilities. This sort of reaction has been met with outcry with some supporters of the policy, including Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, and the Rwandan Foreign Minister, Vincent Biruta, who have a joint article in today's Sunday Times, actually, in which they respond to some of these claims. The response to this criticism is that, proponents say this is the UK living up to its responsibilities, a desire to crack down on this really egregious cross-channel smuggling operation that is destroying the lives financially and also putting a great personal safety risk those travelling across the channel. I've always found this claim, though, and this article talks about it as well, labels the Archbishop as moralising and says that he should sort of keep his nose out of politics, was always a very odd one. In this country, we have bishops in the House of Lords. They are legislators and they very much have a role in terms of dividing and devising our public policy. There's clearly a relationship as well between politics and ethics. At least a great many people in politics would want to say that as well. I don't see any particular reason why the Archbishop shouldn't have a view on this and shouldn't be allowed to espouse it. If you disagree with him, you can raise those criticisms internally, externally, leave the church if you don't like his leadership. I think what's certain, though, is that this is the first in a very long line and a long series of criticism that the government and Priti Patel will be getting. The Commons is back this coming week after a recess. So this plan was actually announced during parliamentary recess, and we're expecting to hear some of the details of it in the coming week. If they don't like some of the criticism that they've got from Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, they should probably brace themselves for some of the criticism that I imagine will come in the House of Commons over the course of this coming week.
Yeah, absolutely right, Thomas. And I saw you smiling when Thomas brought up the idea of people leaving the Anglican Church if they're not happy about what the Archbishop has to say. And there's been quite an attack by some Tory ministers and backbenchers about the Archbishop's comments, saying that he should really just keep his nose out of politics, and perhaps he doesn't even understand the policy that's been put forward.
I mean, I think there's a definite arrogance about this government, and just like Thomas said, so it's going to be a bit of the agreement club, but it's announced in Easter recess, and that's a time when they're not going to get as much of the comeback in the House of Commons. They do it then. I don't think they are expecting to get the critique from this particular area, but now that they have, they kind of come back really, really strong and fighting. I think this government often call people snowflakes and woke, but I sometimes question if they are actually able to take critique on their policies, because they don't seem to take it very well whenever they do. And true, if people in the Anglican Church are unhappy with Justin Welby's leadership, there's no membership as such, so I suppose they could take their bum and put it on a seat somewhere else.
There are plenty of other churches they could join if they want to. Okay, let's keep it moving then this morning. Janelle, you've picked out a story on the front page of the Daily Mirror. The problems facing Boris Johnson. We know he's received one fine, he's paid it. Rumours that more fines are coming, and also rumours that those infamous photographs, perhaps, of him at these parties are about to be published.
Yeah, there's definitely a part of me, every time I see a story, it's a bit like, I roll another story. And the other part of me knows it's actually very important for journalists to stick with stories, because by sticking with stories, that's how you often see justice where it seems like justice won't come. So in that sense, I'm glad that the Mirror and other papers are definitely sticking with the revelations coming on and on and on. I think they do feel kind of sensationalized at this point, like, oh, he was pouring the drinks, but it's like another tiny detail. But at the same time, I do think it shows a regular part of their lockdown culture. It seems like they were having parties or gathering with drinks, generally, when most of us really were trying to stick to the rules. I think when you read these stories, it's hard to put yourself back in that time to what you were doing. I know we have the general stories about people not seeing loved ones, but if I really cast my mind back to those times, and especially as we got into further and further lockdowns, I was living by myself. It was such an awful, isolating time, and I by far didn't have the worst time of it. So when I really put my mind back to how I was following the rules and how I was doing what I should be doing, it really does kind of stick in your craw that actually everyone was not doing this and they really weren't doing it. Were they not taking it seriously because they didn't think COVID was all that serious, or was it because they just didn't think any of these rules apply to them? Yeah. So both of those things that can be true, but also I think his MPs might be suffering from a bit of Stockholm syndrome, because it seems like they're having another clear the air talks, and he's definitely holding them captive with his last election result. But we'll see what happens when it comes to local elections.
So you're right. I mean, Thomas, what do you think? Do those details matter? I saw you rolling your eyes at some of the moments in that, because there's just another moment, isn't it, in this story? It's going to keep coming.
Well, yeah, no, I think that point of the details kind of washing over you is an important one. I mean, the details are starting to wash over me. It's hard to keep track of exactly who said what and when and who was responsible for what. I think what you get a clear sense of, though, and it's on the front page today of the Daily Telegraph as well, and it has a brilliant, I should say the Sunday Times. There's a brilliant quote in there that they have from a source that the Sunday Times has spoken to, in which, in pointing the finger at Boris Johnson, they say, Boris Johnson walked into the typical Friday evening press office, wash up drinks. And you couldn't help but thinking, well, even if Boris did walk in the room and pour the wine, and he should be held responsible for that, why is the press office in number 10 in Downing Street leading the country having wash-up drinks on every Friday afternoon as a typical part of their routine, not to mention the fact that it's in the middle of the pandemic? I think these kind of details as exactly who said what and when, and also, you know, this coming week as well, we've talked about this already, you've got Parliament coming back, there are likely to be votes on whether there should be some sort of a formal investigation into Parliament as to whether Boris Johnson misled the House. Was he untruthful about what he previously told the House? Should there be a proper investigation into his behaviour? All of these kind of details are just going to wash over people, and what you're left with is this potential sense in voters of a bad taste in the mouth. Something isn't quite right, and the test for that will of course be those local elections in May. My prediction probably is the case that, you know, incumbent governments always don't do terribly well in those elections. It will be the case in this instance that you might get some Tory backbenchers, particularly those with some of those tighter margins, getting itchy feet, very restless, saying to themselves, is Boris still the man who can deliver for us in a general election that could be as early as about a year from now? So, you know, about a year earlier than it might have been required to take place, because you want that, you know, run-in time if you were going to introduce a new leader. The question for Tories at the moment is, you know, who would that new leader potentially be? The most dangerous part of all of this isn't really, you know, what the Mirror have on their front page, or quite a few other papers. You know, Boris did exactly this. He poured the drink and then he said a speech. It's that general feeling, and it's one that we're familiar with because it goes back to stuff like the expenses scandal of politics being full of people who are corrupt and only in it for themselves and don't abide by their own rules. And actually, when it comes to you know, politics in general, that's really dangerous, because it isn't the case in the vast majority of cases, and it breeds this kind of cynicism and mistrust in politics, and that's not a very healthy thing. So the government will be doing absolutely everything to move away from this, and they will be stressing, no doubt, in the coming weeks, stuff like cost of living crisis and the need to deal with those issues, war and conflict in Ukraine, and the importance of strong leadership in the UK to deal with those. And it's really important, you know, accountability and transparency matters, and it's important and it's valuable that the Mirror carries on with this kind of thing. But those will be real questions for Tories as well. Who would be a new leader, and could they live up to the job?
Yeah, we'll remain to see what the Conservatives have to say. It's understood that there's photographers at these parties as well, which again is an astounding thing that they would have a photographer wash up drinks when the whole country is in lockdown. All right, let's move on to the front page of The Guardian, Janelle. An exclusive here on the front page, looking at the shocking rate of female deaths in England's poorest areas. The Guardian report that life expectancy is the worst in some of England's poorest areas, and all of the OECD except for Mexico. Just an astounding indictment, perhaps, of the way that women in the poorest areas are being looked after.
Yeah, or not being looked after. We rank 25th out of 38 countries. And, we talk a lot about, internally amongst ourselves in a navel-gazing way about England and compassion and all of these things, and the kind of country that we want to be. But I still think a measure of a compassionate country is how you treat the most vulnerable amongst you. And obviously, we're not treating them all that well. And some of the countries that are ahead of us are countries that we would call developing countries, like Colombia and Hungary. But when you really look at the figures, they are doing better than us at treating their women generally, and they're living that much longer. And its health inequality is something that I think should bother us all. The NHS was created on that premise so that we could all have a bit of equality. People could access healthcare free, free at the point of access. And that's obviously not happening or not sufficient for everyone here. And with the cost of living going up, that means real-term healthcare for some people will go down. And if you live in a more deprived, more crowded area, if you can't afford the private healthcare that sometimes people pay on top, then what does that look like for you? I go into my patient access app, and nearly everything that I would have just considered to go to my GP or to the nurse for, now you can pay for it. It's got a cost attached, but that's not accessible for everybody. And I really think that as this government goes on and have been in power for quite a long time, and looking at how the NHS is struggling, well, I think it's time for us to ask them some serious questions. We can talk about these big flagship policies like Rwanda, which take up all the headlines, but something like this, to me, that should also be taking up equal headlines, because it affects nearly 50% of the population in this country, in the sense of how long we're living and what our health is like whilst we're alive. And I think women's healthcare is something that's not spoken about enough, or probably taken seriously enough. An interesting fact I heard the other day that paracetamols, for instance, were tested on men, never on women. And so when you think about all of these inequalities, it's these things that I think we should really be speaking up about and championing for people who are more vulnerable.
So, right, okay, Janelle, I do appreciate that. Thank you for that. Thomas, I just want to quickly bring up the front page of The Sun. I know you picked this out this morning. If we can bring that up for our viewers to have a look at as well, who haven't got The Sun in their front room. Harry and Meghan hire Obama's bodyguard, former bodyguard, of course. He's not guarding the president at the moment. So, Thomas, as Harry and Meghan look to sue over royal security provided for them, they've hired one of Obama's ex-bodymen.
It's the important stories in the front of The Sun today. Expert advice Harry and Meghan have taken in selecting their security. So their front page, The Sun exclusive, is revealing that Meghan's bodyguard is presidentially approved. A fellow called Christopher Sanchez spent 5 years guarding actually both President Bush and then subsequently President Obama, 21 years in US national security. Harry and Meghan at the Invictus Games this week, obviously for wounded veterans, is taking place on the continent. So all of this coming week, in which high hopes for British athletes there. Increasingly, you have at the moment Harry and Meghan actually suing the UK government on the basis of the UK government declining to provide them with armed security when they left royal duty and moved to the USA. Clearly,
Thomas,
in the meantime,
I apologise.
they've hired the best in the business.
I've given you this one to talk about, but I haven't given you much time to talk about it. We've got more time with you guys later. Janelle, Thomas, thank you for now. Right, still to come on Sky News Breakfast. More on the war in